to Stan Whitaker. Stan took out a lighter and lit it on fire in front of him.
That's, by the way, that YouTube video of us doing a couple Happy the Man tunes, you know, like really crappy sound, but you can kind of,
it's stage volume, so it's you know,
yeah,
better, way better than nothing, and better than some things that I've heard.
It was kind of, it was actually balanced. Just the quality was, you know, questionable, but it was fine. But that's from that gig.
Wow.
So I guess we're live now.
We are live.
All right, Ron, do you want to?
Yeah, we are live.
What's up, Prognauts?
I'm here with some of the members from Ten Jinn. And I got John, Matt, Mark, and Steven.
Howdy, everybody.
Steve's our manager and I guess
11th member.
Guru. Yeah. I thought for one album we could just get all the old band pictures and do cutouts and do like a Sgt. Pepper's style cover. and just use our bodies and just put different heads on to fill out the whole.
Oh, that would be fun, actually. I like that concept.
Or you can make masks.
Yeah.
And masks.
Or something like that.
So the new album that that Nick over at that Nick sent me, and
he's frozen. I can't.
Yeah, Ron, it looks like you're
you're freezing up there, Ron.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. What's funny is like I can on one side I'm frozen, on the other I'm not. There we go. So I got the album to listen to from Nick, and I've been honestly listening to it non-stop.
Oh.
I got it in the car, you know, got it at home, you know, just everywhere I can listen to it. I got it. and I really got to say, I was going back to listen to all the other albums, and it's like each album, it's like upping the game each time. And I was wondering how it was gonna sound compared to the previous album.
I hear nothing.
Yeah.
It's coming and going.
Yeah. You're coming in, your sound is coming in and out, Ron.
Oh, okay. Well, what I was saying is each of the albums that I've listened to, I went back since getting the file from Nick, went back to listen to the other ones just to see how things progressed. And it's like you seem to up your game each time. And after the last one, I was like going, well, where can they go from there? You know, 'cause that was pretty epic and I personally think you did it. You topped that one.
Well, thanks.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, man.
You know, we've like any artist, you want, you know, your next one to be better than your last one, you know, at least as good. You know, you never want to like go backwards.
Well, that's one of the
Right.
strengths.
This was just an honest record. You know, there was really no pretense to it at all. We just played and wrote honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, and the choice of book was I stumbled across this Jack London novel because at first I wanted to do something around 1984 because it was a dystopian type of thing. But 1984 is so bleak and there's no no reason to think that there's any way out of it. But at least with the Jack London book, obscure as it was, from the set and from the point of view of a historian looking back from 700 years in the future when all that nonsense was gone. So we tried to push it to focus on that part of the equation using references to this nasty time period in the early 20th century as being a flashback, that's why, all the elegies are a bit either upbeat, happier, maybe bittersweet. And then you've got something like Nightmare, which is the middle of the crap, So it was really hard to know if we could get the idea across like that, without probably a lot of people haven't read that particular book, but I don't know. We knew what we meant, right, Mark?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of bands that come in using some of those, some like older materials, source material, and finding that it kind of fits with the times now.
Yes.
And it's just it's a very, there's a lot of dark albums that are coming out, and it's nice once in a while to hear something that has some upbeat moments, something that maybe a positive thing that could be happening in the future. Maybe this is like a rebirth.
Yeah.
Because, pardon my language, society went to shit.
You don't have to pardon yourself.
Yeah, not at all. Speak
No,
on.
We agree.
And we're slowly coming out of it. There's almost, I've noticed in some instances, there's almost like one step forward and maybe a half a step back, and we're, but I think we're going to the right direction, and I'm hoping we learn from our mistakes. And I think with music, I think it helps us heal.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, the old say, music is the healing force of the universe. It's quite true. I mean, if we've learned nothing in the last 3 years, it's been, that should be one of the things that we've learned.
And at the risk of sounding, I don't want to drag this into the direction of spirituality too much, but and I don't mean it in the context of any specific religion, but I just mean this this feeling that everything's connected and there's something sacred, not just this like modern cynical kind of like, oh, well, there's nothing after this type thing. I'm not getting preachy, but I'm just saying there is plenty of evidence that past cultures have had this kind of, had one foot in that world. And it's the thing that sustains everything in existence. I mean, even modern theories of theoretical physics are starting to talk about the idea of consciousness being a fundamental force because of the complexity of the feedback system in the universe, that it has to naturally emerge, and it's a singular thing. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'm not going to go any further down that road today. But there was an element of that in the background when, at least from my point of view, I don't know how it is for the rest of you guys, when we were working on this record, I always had, a bit of my attention in the background on bringing that kind of energy into the expression in the album.
Well, I mean, as someone who, we've spoken about this before privately, but being able to be in the group and participate in the in the recording and working on keyboard parts and string parts and such. I remember after you told me about the overarching theme of the album, the dystopian nature of it all, I remember thinking a couple of different things. One of which was I liked that there was, like what Ron was saying, there was a lot of more uplifting moments along with dealing with the really, really heavy stuff, that light and shade is so important, you know. And I think that music is probably, whether you're a spiritual person or not, and whether you follow any kind of religious thing or not, music, like what Mark was saying, music might be the most spiritual thing we actually have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
With the way that, even with all of the technology that's continually advancing, and you know, one could argue that certain aspects of life are more distant and colder now, and we're more isolated. And it's weird, we're isolated and connected at the same time. Like
Yeah.
the new technology has sort of done both of those things at the same time, and in a way, maybe
this weird paradox, you know.
Yeah, it's a weird ass paradox.
Yeah.
And maybe music is the primary, for most people anyway, the primary thing that reminds us of our humanity, and kind of reinforces the more positive connectedness about the human race, even in the midst of all these ups and downs and regime changes. And you know, everything is so cyclical. Even in spite of technology advancing, we kind of keep going around the same wheel, you know.
These things have always been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I like that, you know, echoing what Ron said, I mean, one of the things I enjoyed about being involved with this record was that there were so many different colors being expressed. You know, wasn't just focusing, because you're right, there's a lot of music today is dark, and you know, one could say somewhat narcissistic at times, and more emphasizing the grit and the anger. And yeah, there's plenty of that.
There's plenty of that to go around.
But there's much more.
There's always hope.
Well, to add to what you guys just said, it kind of reminds me of like the whole new age thing in California back in the 90s, where it was all like, you know, kumbaya, holding hands and singing kumbaya. That's not right either. You can't have light without dark. Dark,
thank you.
You know, it's
balance.
It's dualism, right? And as everything in the universe, from the standpoint of physics, is polarized, this dualistic nature is built into the very fabric of space-time. I mean, we can't avoid it. It's what defines this realm in a lot of ways.
It's not an either or position.
No, it's how do you balance these things internally so that one doesn't consume the other, and that something larger than that can grow out of it. And I think in the midst of all this chaos in our society, you know, it's easy to get sucked down that rabbit hole of negativity. But just like the change in seasons, transition periods are always the most chaotic. And so there's a silver lining to that, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I said we weren't going to go into the philosophy or the metaphysics, and here we are. Sorry, Ron.
Wait, that's okay. That's okay, because it's kind of close to the subject of music, because you know, music is just one of those things for me personally that no matter what my day is like, I can escape into the music, and all of a sudden it's like, for that little short period of time, you know, whether it's 50 minutes to 70 minutes, you know, you escape into that time, and you know, feel a little happier when that music is done. I mean, you still got to go back to the world, but you know, just have a little bit, you know, some more, as you guys are saying, light into your life.
Yeah.
Well, isn't it? It's what gives the darkness meaning in a way, because if it was just all darkness or all light, we would have nothing to compare it to, and we wouldn't know what it meant. You know, the old Aristotelian thing about, well, is it hot water or cold water? It depends on if you put your hand into a pail of hot water first or cold water first, then the warm water is going to have a different quality for you. So that kind of a thing. Anyway.
Yeah. And what I like about the music that's now coming out, yours included, is that coming out quicker in a way. I mean, we get quicker access because of things like Bandcamp and unfortunately Spotify. I mean, we get things quicker. And I know a lot of people out there like to use Spotify as their library, you know, and I think that's wrong because, you know, no one's going to, I think ever since, what was it? Napster started, it was just became where the music was not as important to some people.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to do is get back to that. And I don't want to inflate anybody's ego, but I think progressive rock is really the genre of music that can get people back interested in music, because a lot of the pop music today is, you know, it's very same sounding each song you hear. And a friend of mine said it's almost like the flavor of the month. You know, you get tired of it after a while.
Yeah, it seems you know, and it's you know, not to crack on you know, new pop music. Yeah, I really have nothing against it, but what it is now, it's like it is a flavor of the month. It's kind of it's disposable almost,
like everything else in our culture.
pretty much. Yeah, you know, I mean, who's to say that, you know, 40 years from now, what's it, Taylor Swift tune, Anti-Hero, you know, might be a standard, you know, on the same level as like All Right Now.
Yeah, we don't know yet.
You know? Yeah, well, and we'll never know, and we ain't gonna be here, you know. Truth be told,
it's one of those things where I mean, it's kind of that one part of not only the Spotify issue, but also the pop music thing. Technology again has become the double-edged sword.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
It's like it's both good news and bad news that A, we can access anything we want anytime we want.
Yeah.
And B, it's good news and bad news that anyone can make a record.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I don't mean that to sound elitist in any shape or fashion or form, because I think it's important for people to be able to express themselves.
Absolutely.
But there is the one thing about the previous setup. I know a lot of people bitch about the music industry, and they have good reason to. A lot of people have gotten ripped off. But was it ever thus? I mean, people have always gotten ripped off in the music industry. The difference about what's happening now versus what's happening then is that there used to be gatekeepers, and some of those gatekeepers actually cared about music and actually cared about quality. And so it's sort of good and bad that it's a free-for-all now. It has pros and cons. And the thing about the technology, which is the point I was initially trying to get to, was that it's a lot easier for pop music to be cookie cutter and disposable now because of the way most people record, you know, cutting and pasting and, you know, 4-bar loops, and the fact that pop songs don't have pre-choruses or bridges anymore. Did they get lazy? I don't know. But pop music at one time actually was substantial and interesting, and sometimes something breaks through that is still compelling and interesting, but for the most part it's gotten so far to the simple way that it's hard to find any substance there. And that's a shame.
Well, there's another issue going on here too, is that a lot of people who are quote unquote professional musicians nowadays would not have been able to be professional musicians 40 years ago, because you actually had to be able to play an instrument and sing in tune for one thing.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I don't know how much that is a thing or not. I haven't, you know, someone could do a deep statistical analysis of that, I suppose, but you know, now it's almost like if you get close, then it can be fixed digitally.
Yeah. Well,
It's the good and bad of anybody can make a record.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
we've made use of some of those things for, you know, tuning. Oh, it's a great performance, except there's just one note that's bad. Well, in the old days, you'd have an engineer who could punch you in and out to fix
Right.
that. Now you can just send it through Melodyne and just, we'll just fix this.
Yeah.
Because I like the overall performance, feel the performance, you know.
The thing that concerns me is that so much modern music sounds so artificial.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, and granted, you know, I'm about what 5 years younger than you guys, but
More than that for me.
well, okay, closer to 10, but
yeah.
I mean, I grew up in an era where, and being a drummer and a keyboardist, I grew up in an era where click tracks were the norm. Quantization hadn't started happening yet, but there was already this trend towards making everything shoe-shined perfect and smoothing out all the rough edges. And I mean, the one thing that I can say in particular about getting back to Ron's point about the progressive genre maybe bringing more people in is that a lot of that music sounds real.
Yeah.
You know?
It's being played.
It's being played. I mean, granted, of course, there are examples where people make a record and maybe they don't have a drummer, so they've programmed their own drums, but they programmed them. I mean, they're trying to replicate what they think a drummer would play, and it sounds. It's not always exactly perfect, and it's not always exactly quantized.
It sounds human.
It sounds more human. Like, thank you, exactly. And we've lost so much of that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one thing about. I think one of the reasons why I love being in Ten Jinn and I like being in the projects that I'm in is there's that whole thing about, you want it to sound professional. You want it to sound really good. You also want it to sound human.
Yes.
Sound what?
Human.
Yeah. Yes.
Like there's an actual connection there, rather than rather than being able to clearly hear that something was concocted kind of by AI or machine or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
The first record, Wild Man, honestly, the interesting thing about that, I mean, that's probably the least quote unquote progressive of our records, because originally that was recorded for AAA radio back in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
This was before Mark. It was Ken Francis and I and Ivor Francis who basically did everything. And Ken actually programmed the drums, but he's a drummer, so he knew how to do it in a way that it would sound like somebody had played it,
Yeah.
But
that's a big deal.
One of the advantages with the technology too, say for example with Sisyphus, was that there was a lot of meter changes, there's a lot of accelerations and decelerations in the song, and doing that, like scoring it out in Sibelius and then pulling out the MIDI files for the click, all that stuff was built into the click. So working at a distance like we were, it made it possible for us to do something of that complexity without all being in the same room. Like Mark, you and I, when we did Theater of the Vampires on Darkling Plain, it was like we got lucky too.
First take, we
there was
jaked
no
it.
way to have a click track to that in those days, and we just sat down. Well, we'll just give this a shot, see what happens. I figured we'd be there all afternoon. One time through, and it was like, okay, that's a keeper.
Tear down the kit.
and that day where we were doing background vocals, and we went for 3.5 hours straight without having to do a retake.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite sessions of all time.
It was great. We basically knocked out 40% of the background vocals on that record that night.
Without a retake.
Good on you.
Francis kept saying, oh, that's good. Okay, that's good. And I looked at him once and go, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Well, that's the, I think, honestly, you get to feel the there we go. Honesty about the music is when if you put it all out all at once and then not go in and touch it, how do you say, warts and all,
Yeah.
and because you could probably be on an album, probably maybe years and years thinking, okay, I can fix this, I can fix that, and so on. But then when is it ready for, the fans to listen to it? Like,
Well,
I
that's
think,
my tendency, and Mark had to always like say, "Hey, John, it's fine. Just
Yeah.
quit.
Yeah.
Just leave it alone."
You have to know when to put the brush down.
Yeah, the finish line.
right.
The finish line is always a moving target. I mean, it really depends on each of us as individuals have a different definition of where that finish line is. And yeah, sometimes it helps to have someone in your corner that can maybe have a little bit more objectivity and say, this is a good place to end the paragraph and now
move on.
It's hard to do that by yourself a lot of the time,
Yeah. So, before anybody, if anyone out there wants to listen to some of the songs, they're up. There's 3 of them that I know of right now. They're up on your Bandcamp, just to
Yes.
kind of get a glimpse as to what the album's going to sound like. But that's just a glimpse. Once
Yeah.
you get, I think once you get this album, this is going to be an album that prog critics and the fans alike are going to be like almost gushing about it for the year. Because I mean, I've just noticed that more stuff that comes out at the beginning of the year seems to be more lasting to the end.
Nice.
I think this record has a lot of also cross. I hate to use this term because it sounds so cliched and corporate, but I think this record has a lot of what you might call crossover potential too, because it definitely will appeal to people who like long form music and people that appreciate having a through line through a record. But the fact that each song has its own flavor and own character, I think is a big, big selling point, to be honest. It sounds, I don't like, just speaking for myself, especially when Mark and John and Ken started to send me tracks to contribute to play on and come up with parts for, and Mike as well. I remember thinking, yeah, there's a lot of substance here. There's a lot of genres being represented, and a lot of just, there's groove and there's melody and there's lots of harmony. Like all the things I love about a record are in there already. I'm like, oh, I get to add something to this. Cool, great.
Right.
Sign me up, man. I mean, it's very multifaceted, and I think that could not also potentially bring in a lot of people who maybe don't even know that they like prog rock or art rock or whatever you want to call it. I think it has the potential to bring in some people who are maybe more interested in other types of music too.
Well, that you bring up a good point there, Matt. Just this is sort of a sidebar, but Matt and I are both keyboard players. I mean, I also front the band, but we've got very different skill sets in our wheelhouse. So we tend not to step on each other's toes, which is really a fortunate accident. I don't know if you want to look at it like that.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a solo player or an improv guy, and that is Matt's wheelhouse. That's right in Matt's wheelhouse. So, if there's ever something like that that's needed, it's like, well, that's Matt's job. So he gets to shine there. And like, for example, the solo on Aladdin Sane from the Bowie tribute record, that crazy solo he did. I mean, that was first time I heard that, I was like, yeah.
That was such a blast to do too. I remember when you called me to get involved in that. And I remember thinking, oh, all right, how are we going to approach this? Because if anything, and I want to use this to highlight the great contrast and complementary nature of the way John and I are able to work together. Because anytime you have 2 guitarists or two keyboard players or all of the above, you're constantly potentially fighting for bandwidth and real estate, and it can be really tricky. You know, you have to communicate so effectively, and so a lot of times that takes a lot of negotiation. In a way,
Yeah.
we got kind of lucky because we both love music in the center and come at it from different angles, but both have traits that the other person admires in the other. So, like I just sit there and sometimes I listen to when John will talk to me about something, and I'll be like, why the fuck did I quit studying counterpoint and composition? Because if anything, I'm sort of almost intuitive to a fault. I'm always very much, even when I was in the other bands, when we did a museum, when we did Heliopolis, and whenever I've done sessions for other people, a lot of times I tend to operate more on a kind of a Zen mind, beginner's mind perspective. And there's definitely pros and cons to that approach. The pro, if there is one for me anyway, is that you capture the initial flush of energy and the initial freshness of what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the most honest.
And you only get that one time.
Yeah.
Right.
And what'll often happen is, I'll do that. And then, I mean, when it comes to a solo, yeah, you're going to take a few takes until the right one happens. But same thing with like coming up with string parts. I'll do a lot of conceptualizing. I'll listen to the tracks, take some notes. And maybe it's just dumb luck, but a lot of times when coming up with parts, it's first or second take. And I'll look at whoever's engineering and say, yeah, that's pretty good. I think maybe I'd like to take another shot at it. And usually the person on the other end of the board is like, no, that was great. We're going to use that. Like, what? Okay.
So I learned a lesson after you did your solo on Aladdin Sane. Moving forward, when we started working on the new record, I always make sure I carve out a place for you to do your thing as much as possible. I mean, some of them are more composed than others, like, for example, the Elegy 3.
Oh, yeah.
But the thing there is that it's more shifted towards a classical sensibility. And when you're dealing with that sort of thing, you really have to craft it, especially if there's contrapuntal textures, because the whole thing is focused on the interplay of the horizontal lines, not just a melody floating over top of a chord progression, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying it brings another flavor to the palate. It's like a little extra spice. And that because you're a chef too, Mark.
Yeah.
I always eat really well when I go out to rehearse with these guys because he's always making dinners. I'm like, Christ.
Unless we order pizza.
It's like a 5-star hotel.
See, Ron, one of the cool things about John and I, the way our relationship works, first of all, I gotta tell you about a moment when we were preparing for Rozfest last year. We had a series of rehearsals where John would come out to California and we would get the band together and work on the tunes. Sisyphus was the main thrust of the set. And I remember at one point during either the first or second round of rehearsals where I nearly had a little bit of a mini breakdown where I was like, oh my God, I'm in over my head. How am I going to do this? I know I can do this, but how?
Right.
And it was mostly because of that. I think what my initial insecurity about it was maybe I've kind of strayed too far away from my own compositional roots to be able to give this what it really deserves. And I don't remember how it got resolved. I think we were in the middle of one particular section, and between Mark and John and myself, we were able to work it out. And then I think we came back the next day and all of a sudden it fell together. Because I remember speaking to my lady friend at the time going, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. And it felt like a major victory to be able to get past that obstacle. And it was great for me. And I think it really strengthened my friendship and my relationship with John, because we both were able to say, you know, you do some unbelievable things that I don't know how to do. And I'm learning more about how to potentially do them because we're working together.
Well, that goes ditto for me too, because when I heard that Aladdin Sane solo, I was intimidated. I'm like, what the fuck, man? You know, but I've been experimenting a little bit more going that direction as well. I think we're pulling each other, you know, there's a little osmosis going on here with our styles, you know?
Yeah.
And,
definitely.
You know, and having a writing partner in Mark for almost 30 years now, it's like we kind of read each other's minds in a way I remember the first few tunes we started working on, it was before the pandemic, and we would just, you know, and sit down behind he'd turn on his recording stuff, and it's like, why don't we try this? Let's try that. And I hadn't worked like that for so long, for so many years from doing the master's degree in composition. I was so used to it being so structured that I was like a little bit lost at first, but it's like riding a bike. And Mark's strength, one of the things he brings, besides being an excellent drummer and multi-instrumentalist, is he brings a really, really highly honed songcraft sensibility to the whole thing. Just like little subtle changes. The cadential formulas are slightly different every time, you know, a section comes around, and that just makes it a little more surprising in little ways, but it has a cumulative effect too, which makes it a better song in the end, you know? So
we had a lot of fun writing those first 3 tunes. It was Slaves in the Machine, which is the first tune that you and I had written in like 22 years.
Yeah.
We hadn't sat together and written anything in that long. And especially when I'm writing with somebody, there's all, you know, when you're experimenting and you know, just dipping your toes in all these waters, I don't want to leave any idea behind. So sometimes, like, John would come up with something like, I'm not sure that'll work. I was like, don't forget that. Just set that to the side. And lo and behold, that little piece that he set to the side was like a little transition that gets us to the next part of another song, you know. And I have a lot of fun writing like that. And Matt and I have written together, and Matt and I we've worked together in other bands before, and Matt and I just have this bizarre hive mind thing that happens. And like all that time in a museum, man, when we were creating those tunes, we would come to a point where a corner needed to be turned. And Matt and I would just kind of look at each other, and I would play something and Matt would go, got you, and take it off from there. And vice versa, he would do the same thing.
And the other 3 guys are like, what just happened?
How did we get back here? And Matt and I are like, yeah, it's a thing we do.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, it's just this thing.
That's why on future records, you know, we need to bring you into the writing wheelhouse a little bit more.
And I definitely want to be a part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the intention is there, believe me. And I'm grateful that you want me to be involved in that way. So it'll happen for sure. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, you guys.
Go ahead, Ron. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you guys. Like I was saying earlier, each album is like you top the previous one, and whether it's with the songs or how you approach the songs. Right? I mean, I remember the first one that I got from you guys was on A Darkling Plain, when it was maybe a few months after it was released, or maybe the following year I got it, and then after that was Alone, which was a completely different sound, but you still heard in my ears, it almost sounded like it was a continuation of Wild Men, but more progressive.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then when came out. Oh, gee, it's like that's a completely different animal. You know, it kind of reminded me of how old school prog bands approach their music. It was like, you know, a big epic track in, you know, multi parts, but it's just done in such a way that it just, you look at it and it's like, wow, I gotta really pay attention here.
I mean,
Oh.
John and Mark might have a different perspective on this, but one of the things I have admired about Ten Jinn's career arc, about the way the music has flowed out, is that all the people who are involved in the writing, and some of us who help with, you know, extra stuff on top, we're all kind of restless musically. And what I mean by that is that I think the attitude is more of an old school attitude, in that when the music that became known as progressive music in time was being created, all the bands were constantly trying different things with every record. The goal was not to repeat oneself. Maybe you had a sound, but
A silver thread that goes through it all, right?
thank you. Yeah, exactly. But John and Mark and I and Mike, we've all talked about this at great length. It's very important to all of us in our own way, to keep things. It's part of the thing that keeps music interesting for all of us. But their whole catalog from Darkly Plain on through, I love that every record sounds different. And it's like, obviously that shows a very important intention to not make the same record, you know, and let it, okay, well, what's the next? We don't know what the next one's going to be. Well, maybe we do, but let's see what transpires. And there, I mean, at least maybe John and Mark, maybe you can elaborate on this, but my hunch is that when you guys are working on new songs or when new tunes come up, there's not a lot of thinking, or at least consciously, about, you know, do we want to make something that sounds like what was on the last record? I don't get that vibe at all.
No,
not in the least. What we did, you know.
Yeah.
What we're doing now, we're doing now. And if something happens to sound like it came from back there, is because that's what we are. That's what we sound like, you know?
Yeah, right. You come with
that
that
silver
on.
thread again. That silver thread again.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all have a certain number of, I mean, I'm always looking for new inspiration. And honestly, I get a lot of inspiration when I'm watching movies. There might be something in the soundtrack that grabs me. I remember the first part of Sisyphus. When I started working on it, there was a movie out called The Forgotten. It was Julianne Moore. It was like it was a science fiction-y thing. And there was this one chord change in the soundtrack. And I thought, God, that thing, I just love that thing. And I incorporated that particular progression in the first part of Sisyphus. Now, it doesn't sound anything like the soundtrack, but it's like, so I'm not one of these guys that I follow someone's career and that's my influence. It's more generic than that. I'll hear something just on an off chance in a movie or just somewhere else, and it just gets into my wheelhouse and it goes through the blender and it comes out, you know, a little different, but still you can see where it came from, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, we all draw inspiration from all sorts of places. You mentioned the movie, John. The song, what do we call it? The Legend of Green on Alone was inspired by me watching The Devil's Own, Harrison Ford and
all the Irish motifs in the music.
That soundtrack knocked me out. So I had that vibe in my head for like the next 3 or 4 days, and one day just sat with my acoustic and that song appeared. So You know, it's just
And,
inspiration comes from everywhere.
and
Yeah.
it's a lot. And that particular song, I remember that when we played that live, I think I was playing acoustic guitar on that, and it's like a B9. It's like a B9 chord. What the fuck, man? It's like, I'm not much of a guitar player, but it's more it's a little more complex than it sounds, you know. And that's one of Mark's strengths, like Brotherhood of Man, for example, or even Adumbrations. There is not a straightforward triadic chord in that whole damn song, although it doesn't. You would never guess it from the overall sound, you know. But it's that kind of a thing. It's more
Adumbrations is actually one of my favorite tunes in the past 10 years. I mean, I remember when you guys first laid that on me, I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
And then the parts
so
that you came up
catchy.
for it in keyboards added another dimension to
Dude,
it.
just
It
completely
brought it to life, you know.
Absolutely. Because I mean that thing was actually just like a little chord progression that I literally laid my hands down on the guitar one day and thought, and just came up with like an A and B section. I was like, okay, that's cool, and then set it down. And John and I talked, and I said, yeah, I just kind of did this thing, and I played it for him. He goes, dude, send that to me. It hit, something hit him. He wrote the rest of it, and that's how that song became.
Well, you know, I had a little trouble with that at first. I had an idea, and when I actually worked on it, it was going to slow down, and I was doing some of my usual sort of open chord things, and I thought to myself, God, man, you got to get some new material. And then we had a discussion about Todd Rundgren, and I thought, why don't I I'm not going to go listen to Todd Rundgren for this, but I'm just going to try to remember what I know about some of his, you know, tricks of the trade. And I just thought, in general, I'm going to go that direction. And that's, you know, just playing with chord inversions and slightly different, and more with rhythm, you know, because, and then I think what I sent back to you, you then curated it a little bit further and threw in your.
Well, I made it. Well, yeah, you had what you had written, you did on piano, and I basically translated it from piano to guitar.
For guitar, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage of having, you know, more like several good writers in a band, is that you never get stuck. Somebody will always come up with a solution, you know.
I mean, when I was coming up with parts for Adumbrations and for Slaves in particular, I mean, I could single out a couple others, but those ones immediately come to mind. I remember thinking, for Adumbrations, I kind of, there were aspects of it that I honed in on that in a way kind of almost suggested, I definitely heard the Todd thing. That was, and I loved that. It was like, oh, okay. But then I thought, you know what? There's so much happening in the middle of the sound. You know, the guitars, have that real estate really, really well handled. What do I want to do with this? And then I thought, all right, well, I'm over at Mike's, you know, we're recording at his place, and he's playing me the tracks, and I just said, well, let's run a couple of times. And I came up with this very simple part up on the top that almost sounds like bells.
Yeah.
And it's just a real simple, repetitive pattern. It almost functions like a tambourine or something. It almost doesn't sound
right.
But that was just what it needed. Everything else was already there. And then when it came time to put in the organ and fill in the stuff in the middle, it was like, all right, we're going to put some meat in this part.
Yeah. And
then doing Slaves, you know, John had made some verbal suggestions to me, like, you know, I need something that'll help ride the coda out. And
yeah, that's that mellotron part. And you threw that in the bridge right before going into the bridge and at the end. And it was just it was almost like a Genesis-ish type of, you know, motive or
yeah.
style.
Well, I think Ron already knows this about me, because we've talked about different bands that I've been involved with, and I told him many times that I kind of avoided being involved in bands that were doing a lot of things that were progressive influenced, because I initially thought that I held those records, especially the Genesis and Yes records, in such high regard that anything I did was just gonna be a pale imitation of it. So I avoided it for a really long time. I kind of embraced my other influences because that music felt so sacred.
Right.
And working with Heliopolis and then with the museum helped to kind of break that for me. It made me less, I don't know what the word is. I became a little less conservative about it. I felt like, oh, what the hell? Let's give it a shot. And there are times when that Tony Banks way of putting together mellotron chords just feels like the right thing to do. And that's what I heard, and that's what I think Fountain of Salmacis perhaps, or something like that. Like, it just felt like, even though it didn't sound anything like it, my immediate thought was nursery crime for some reason. That's just what hit. And I went,
Right.
all right, well, what if we do a little bit of this?
But that's one of the places where our Venn diagram overlaps. Is
right.
Tony.
Yeah,
You know?
precisely. You know, I mean, I'm kind of equal parts Genesis and Weather Report, you know, and there's some overlap there, thankfully, you know, and then, you know, Miles, but there's a lot of places where that Venn diagram doesn't really cross. So
and I'm equal parts Genesis and like Bartok or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
You know, all of us have all of us have a couple of, we all love a lot of the same music, but each of us also are enthusiasts about some things that are very much outside that square.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what makes it so fun and so interesting, because every now and then something will pop in that, where'd you get the influence for that? Oh, I was listening to a lot of Gary Newman. Really? That totally worked. You know, like, you just never know where something is going to hit you in the gut and say, I need some of that energy in this part.
Yeah.
It could come from literally
or
anywhere.
in my life as an artist. It's like, okay, that I can take little pieces of that and add that to the sum that is what I am as an artist, you know.
Yeah, I think that's what keeps music truly progressive, if you want to use that word, is the freedom to allow all of those things to be a part of the stew.
It's more of an attitude than a style.
Yeah,
Indeed.
precisely.
Exactly.
It's much more of an attitude than a style, and it should be. It should be. It's about not having any rules.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just goes the way of what we were saying about pop music. It just becomes imitative to ad nauseum, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing that I mean, looking back into the 90s, it seemed like, I'm not sure if you guys noticed it, but there was a lot of bands that were sounding the same, and you can basically cite, okay, well, that guy's vocals is either Peter Gabriel or John Anderson. And, you know, that was how their vocals were. And it was very few times that you heard someone vocals that were like, that's completely different. And that's where, honestly, that's where John's vocals come in. It's different than anything else that was happening in the 90s when the guys first started. And I think more people at that time were wanting a Gabriel or an Anderson sound alikes. And looking back at that, it's like that, I guess in a way it was Prague was in its resurgence in some areas of the world. And
Third
in
wave,
other ways it was just,
baby.
it was like looking too far back, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you didn't
Well,
sound
yes.
like Rush or Genesis or Yes, then you weren't Prague or something like that. You know,
Maybe it needed to go. Maybe it needed to go through that period. I mean, some great music came out of that era.
Right.
I think maybe it needed to go through that.
Yeah, and you know, and Prague had kind of disappeared in in the 80s, it was like you were musically forbidden to reference Yes or 70s era Genesis, anything from Abacab back, you couldn't reference that.
Yeah.
Or like Asia in the 80s.
In the
Well, I have a-
80s, in the
I have a
80s, but
personal-
it's like
Rock pop.
once like the 90s hit, and like one band that a couple of bands that I kind of tip my hat to for kind of like making us remember that prog rock exists is one in particular is Toy Matinee.
Yeah.
When they
Last
when
Plane
I
Out.
first heard Last Plane Out and the guitar intro, is like, that is straight Gentle Giant. That is Octopus.
Yeah.
I know exactly
Hell
where
yeah.
you got that.
Hell
And
yeah.
and not that Kevin Gilbert like went and played Octopus and transposed it to the song, but he took that idea and created this new song. It's like you brought all these people who have been clamoring for something with a little more meat to it, but but at the same time, it doesn't have to be like the 18-minute tune with the 3-minute droney intro. Let's get to it. Let's get my toes tapping and get me something to sing along to, and something I'm going to come back and listen to.
Well, Chris Cornell's another guy like that.
Chris Cornell's
Black Hole
amazing
Sun
singer.
and some of that stuff was, I thought, this almost sounds progressive. It's not, it's still like somewhere between classic rock and progressive. I know I'm putting labels on something I probably shouldn't, but
Jane's Addiction's Ritual De Lo Habitual did that for me too.
Yep.
In 1990. That album was like too punky to be really like progressive and too arty to be punk. It was everything all at once. And I just went, oh man, wow, check this out. These are a bunch of guys that bands are not, they're fearless. They're like, we're just gonna put all this shit together and
serve it up.
Yeah.
Serve it up. And those albums really, I think, brought a progressive mentality back.
Living Color too,
which is experiment with your creativity
absolutely
in a general way.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and maybe that spirit eventually, obviously there was the revival that started in the 80s with IQ and Marillion and Pendragon, and then by the 90s we had Spock's Beard and the Flower Kings, although Stolk had obviously started long before then. But maybe what eventually happened is all of those streams by the 2000s in particular, they all started to really come together. That's what it seems like to me,
Well, I remember when I was doing my junior year abroad at Cambridge University, this was 1979. And that was at the height of the punk thing, just before New Wave was starting. And I couldn't understand, because I was still into Genesis and bands like that. And my friends there, people I became friends with, were like, their attitude was, it was just getting to be a caricature of itself, and it was boring to them. And it helped me to understand, living in that culture, what was going on in a way that I wouldn't have if I hadn't spent some time there. And I thought, that's interesting. And then I came home, and the cars were all over the radio here in the United States. And bands like the Vapors were, with the Turning Japanese, it was like the new wave thing. And then Missing Persons, and I think people give that stuff a bad name, but
there's a lot of creativity in that
stuff.
Missing Persons was like my saving grace in the 80s.
It was not unlike
it was fun music.
It was
it was fun music.
And plus it's all Zappa alum.
It was not unlike the Baroque transition into classical music, when people got burnt out on all that complex counterpoint from Bach, from Bach and people like that. And along comes Mozart. And I'm not saying his music was simple, but it was very vertical. The sections were very well defined, that kind of a thing. And it was still heady music, but I think to the average listener, they felt like they could get their head around it a little
You
better.
can sing along.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Well, the other thing too is that, I mean, by the late 90s, early 2000s, there were bands that were, I mean, you kind of see how, I'll just use it as an example because it's, I mean, it has become a prog rock cliche, but the fact that the Mellotron and the Chamberlain all of a sudden had a big presence towards the end of the 90s, and a lot of other kind of bands, alternative bands, and even into AAA stuff. I mean, Radiohead and the Flaming Lips and a lot of these bands they were like, we dig these sounds. We're not going to relegate them to the cone of shame. We're going to fucking use them because they're right for what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way helped, I don't want to say legitimize it because that sounds really elitist. But I think it did help kind of get rid of some of the stigma.
There you go.
You know what I mean? And that's good. That's really good. I mean, and you were talking about Soundgarden before, and I mean, there was so much from that period. You were talking about
I forgot the band's name. That's why I say Chris Cornell and used the one song. I couldn't wait, what's that band's name? God damn it. I couldn't remember it.
I mean, the first time I heard the Super Unknown record, the first time I heard My Wave and the middle section, I was like, that's straight up like One More Red Nightmare, man. I mean, I was here, like, I was totally here, and I don't know if anyone else was hearing that, but as it turns out, I saw an interview recently with Matt Cameron, and he was a huge Bill Bruford guy.
I know.
So, there you go.
That Cameron's
and even in metal, I mean, we see how much metal has influenced prog, but like the first band I was really into as a kid was Iron Maiden. And then I found out that Bruce Dickinson and Steve Harris were huge Jethro Tull and Genesis and Van der Graaf Generator fans. And then when I got into Pawn Hearts and got into all the early Genesis and Jethro Tull, I was like, wait a minute, I can hear it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all there, man. It's all there.
Oh yeah.
So,
and the other thing from, going into Soundgarden, that song Jesus Christ Pose, I mean, that was all over the map.
Yeah.
And, okay, and to me, that's like Chick Corea. I don't know who in the band was digging on Chick, but that whole middle section, that is like a very Chick Corea-esque thing. And one of the reasons I absolutely love that song.
Yeah, it's when I first heard that, I was like, going, why this is kind of interesting to be put on MTV. It's just too, like you were saying, too elitist sounding, but this sounded too good for it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, exactly. It's like too hip for the room.
Yeah,
too hip for the room. Yeah.
But I think everything in a way influences each other, and while you guys stay in a more progressive realm, there's some that stay in maybe a pop realm, but they have like similar influences to you, but it's just how they create their music.
Yeah,
and how those influences get filtered into who they are artistically.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why I think when this album comes out, which what is the release date?
The 11th of September.
Go ahead, Steve. You take that. By the way, Steve, in case you don't know, Ron, Steve is our manager. I've known Steve since we were about 8 years old. So that's like a lot of years. I'm not going to say how many, but we were actually in our first band together when we were 15 or 16 or 17 or something like that.
Yeah, high school.
In high school, yeah. So
yeah,
so it's nice to have someone running the business side of things who's also has a great understanding of music. It really, I don't know why, but
So Steve, do you know when our record's coming out?
It is being released on May 26th.
Okay.
And pre-orders Nick will start taking pre-orders on April 28th.
All right,
Yeah,
there you go. Anybody who's listening, there you have it.
Yay.
There you have, and you
M-
really gotta
MRR
buy it.
music.
You really gotta buy it because I really think this is one of the very important albums that I've listened to. I mean, I can't speak for anyone else out there.
Thank you.
But
Ron.
Thanks, man.
but if
Thanks.
you like what I've been saying for the past almost 20 years, I'm pretty spot on as to what I like, and it's like this is just one of those albums that once I pre-order it, I want to have it in physical media. That's my thing.
You're
Yeah.
giving your age away,
I'm sure-
Ron.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah,
We're all in the same boat.
that's
there.
all right.
Yeah.
But it's one of these albums you really got to buy. I mean, and once you hear it, you'll understand why I'm saying that. And it's one of those ones that the minute it finishes, you want to start it back up again because you're like going, okay, it's kind of like a cliffhanger type of a situation where it's like, okay, now what? Okay, well, let's just go back to the beginning and listen to it again. And then, and I always hear something a little different each time I listen to the album. So that's what I like about this album.
Okay, Rod, you totally made my day.
Yeah.
I've told John, and Matt knows this too. That whole thing of you've listened to the album and just like, let's run it back again. I look at that's like, to me, that's like, I call that the rubber soul syndrome. It's like, I want our, any album that I'm creating, I want that effect to happen. I want you to want to run it back, when it's over. Rubber Soul is that, that's one of my favorite Beatles records, and it's like 34 minutes, and it's when you get to the end, you're like, oh man, it's over. Oh, let it run one more time. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So yeah, thank you for saying that, because that was
welcome.
our,
You're welcome.
that is really what we want, with any of our releases. We want you to
Right.
enjoy listening to them and like, oh, okay. And this album's like 48 minutes, something like that. So we're not taking up a whole lot of your time.
Yeah.
Right.
Inner Vision.
Just the right amount.
For me, where I always want to go back to. It's like the last track fades out, and I think I want to hear it again. And every time I do, even though I've been listening to it for 30 years, I hear something different every single time.
Yeah.
Mr. Know It All fades out, and we go back with
Too high. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's many records in different genres that fit that bill for me. But yeah, Ron, thanks a lot. I mean, that I didn't get to write on this record, mostly because I've been having writing issues. But I was fortunate enough to be able to be on the team and help with arrangements and with the string arrangements and keyboard stuff, and enjoyed every second of it. And
You very rarely come up with an idea that isn't good.
well, thank you. You haven't heard everything I've come up with. But.
Well, that's why I'm saying no one's perfect, right? But I'm saying that what you come up with is spot on.
It's always
Well,
great, man.
Yeah, it's
You guys
it
make it
always
so
works.
easy. I mean, in a way, it's just the material and the concepts and the ideas are so strong that and they're very cinematic. The songs just lend themselves to wanting to tell a story, and that already puts a creative person in a frame of mind where they think, all right, well, how can I possibly contribute to this? How can I make it better? What's something that's already great? How can I enhance it?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Headspace,
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a nice segue into something I wanted to say about that whole cinematic approach. That's come for me, at least for me, that comes straight out of Bowie. From the first time I saw him, like in doing all his characters, like Gabriel did that too, with his characters. But that was like there was a lot of that going on in the 70s. And it always made a deep impression is that I want to tell a story here. I want there to be a theatrical component to it that's more than just, oh, I'm going to listen to the music. I want to bring a little bit more to that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a good time to mention that we are going to be also doing a reprint of the Ziggy Blackstar album, and we're adding a new tune to it the second time around. We're doing our version of Blackstar. And I got to tell you, I sat down and curated the whole, structure of the song. I mean, in terms of I was sitting there for hours listening to the video and writing out the main parts and the bass line and trying to get my head around how am I going to make this my own. So that preparation phase is done. Everyone's got the files. And so now we're going to see what kind of madness we cook up with that one.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
So that's going to be a nice addition to the record when we reprint it. And then after that, we're planning on doing a retrospective. We're trying to give ourselves some time to have things that we can constantly release while we're thinking about now preparing some of this new material to add to our set for, the next time we're going to go out live. I don't know if you were going to get into that, but I just figured Matt just provided the perfect segue here.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that the Ziggy Blackstar thing was just amazing. And then for you guys were talking earlier about Aladdin Sane. That's currently I think that's in my top 2 favorite songs of Bowie.
Good.
And I just like that. It just all of a sudden it just takes you someplace, and you guys did an excellent job of it.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
That song has.
I got. What was that?
No, I was just saying that song has such. But all of Bowie's music and it through his different phases puts you in different places. There's something about that one particular song that just is like no other, really. So to be able to try to do something with it, and, it was really intimidating for me to be thinking like, oh my God, Garson did an unbelievable job with this. What the hell am I going to do? So that was a very interesting Rubik's Cube to try to solve.
I remember you asked me at one point, Matt, you said, well, do you want this to be like the record? I said, no, just capture the spirit of it. And so this guy, as you know, you've listened to Ten Jinn before, we use a lot of modal, kind of constructions on the songs. And and he managed to work into this great solo, stuff that sounds like something out of Aaron Copland via Keith Emerson, along with the fact that a really strong, like Phrygian type cadence formula in spots that darkened it just enough. And you could hear the nod to Garson, but yet it was a completely different animal. So,
right.
Bravo.
That was fun.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, how far Bad Scientist are we going to go? Let's see how far we can push it and see if it works. It's always like jumping off the deep end and giving it a try. So
that's what I like about cover songs is when you're covering a song, is you don't make it note for note. I had a friend of mine that he had a band and they wanted to do some cover songs. They always had trouble with it. And I said, you know how to read music, go find the music and pretend like you created it.
Yeah.
That It's never been done before. You create it and you make it your own. And if people, you're always going to have people go, oh, it doesn't sound like it or sounds too much like it. It's like you're never going to please everybody, but please yourself with the outcome. And he did The Knife, but it was a 3-piece band, no keyboards. So all the keyboard parts were done by and he was more of a heavy metal guitarist, so it even beefed it up more. So it's like it turned into a different kind of an animal. So it's like, so it's great when people can do that.
Well, Mark did that with Fame. I mean, he completely, that's about as far away from the original as any of the songs we did, but it works. It works just fine. You know, some of those keyboard gestures, those string gestures were right out of Madman Across the Water from Elton John. You know, I remember distinctly remembering some of those gestures that were made in the strings on Madman Across the Water. And I thought, that's going to work in this context, you know? Just as an example. You know, and some of the songs had to be a little closer. You know, some of them we could take more liberties with, like Life on Mars. I mean, I didn't want to mess too much with that, only in terms of my vocal delivery, at least for me. Other than that, it was pretty true to the original, though we did add a lot of harmonies, and I added that big choir thing at the end. Yeah, so what? But Mark, you know, when I first heard the backtracks for Fame, I was like, yeah, this is going to be fun. But you know, it's a faster tempo, and it was hard to get all the words out at times. I really take a breath and just, you know.
Well, yeah, I changed the feel, and you know, to what you're saying, Ron, about making, you know, like pretending like, you know, the cover never existed, or the song never existed before. I kind of had to do that with when John asked me to come up with an arrangement for Fame. Such a classic Bowie tune. It's like nobody doesn't know what that song sounds like, and how am I going to not make it sound like the original? Because making it sound exactly like the original is arrogant.
R&B it out, man, like you did.
Well, it was already extremely R&B, you know, from jump, and
but you explored a different angle.
I just made it swing a little more, and had a stony morning, and that idea hit my brain. Of like, okay, let me try that, and it worked. The trickiest part was listening to the original and pulling all of Carlos Alomar's guitar parts.
Yeah.
And trying to translating it to this new groove. It still give you the same vibe that he did. Because I mean, his stuff that was brilliant, and that is straight out of James Brown.
Yeah,
that is straight out of James Brown. And I'm a huge JB. I mean, the king. You know. So to keep that vibe going and give it just a little fresher spin was a challenge, but it was fun once I knew what lane to get in.
Yeah, you got to find your doorway into it. You know, once you do that, then the rest of it is just details, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I spend a good amount of my professional life covering other people's material, and I have a very almost love-hate relationship with that, because the jazz part of me wants to reinterpret all the time,
every day,
and some settings don't allow for that or don't call for it, and sometimes I bristle at that, but I accept that that's what I got to do sometimes in some bands, in some situations. And when I am able to reimagine a song or have a moment where I can make it my own, whether it's a vocal delivery or a song arrangement or in the solo section, okay, here we go. At least we can do that, you know. Because given my druthers, I would probably prefer to mostly do it that way rather than, oh, you got to play it just like the record. Like, I learn stuff from the record so that I can jump off the record. I can jump off the platform and then go somewhere else.
Well, you know, you bring up a good point, because now that I'm starting to work on the vocals for Black Star, I've decided I'm not listening to Bowie's version anymore. I scored out what I needed to score out.
So if you know the song, just sing the song.
I've been listening to Bowie's version.
I'm going to let the song tell me what it needs in this context, you know?
Yeah. I mean, the example that Ron, that you brought up about the guitar trio doing the knife, that automatically means that you have to reimagine it, because you know, the primary instrument has been replaced with a different one. So your tonal palette is automatically going to change. as a young kid, I was really, really into guitarists. I wasn't really into keyboardists all that much. And it influenced the way I play keyboards. I got into keyboardists later. It was very, very bizarre set of circumstances. But I strum piano chords because I love guitar players so much. And a lot of people go, how do you do that? And I'm like, go listen to Gilmore strum a chord. And they go, oh. So, and even when my approach to soloing, my approach to synth solos and stuff is probably more like a guitar player, or maybe a little more like a horn player, because of the way that I love that level of expression. And that's a whole other can of worms there. Like, just as a musician, focusing on an instrument other than your own.
Absolutely.
When you're looking for an angle on how to express oneself, sometimes that's absolutely the right way to go.
Oh yeah.
I heard that in Ardis, and your solo on Ardis, the song, not the album.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah, that I don't remember what my thought was at the time, but I think there was definitely a feel of like maybe I was trying to think about like being a sax player or something. And when you're a pianist or when you're a keyboard player, it's very, very easy to, and we all fall into our trick bags. We fall into our cliches, and it's very common to kind of go, all right, well, I'm going to think more chordally, and maybe I'm going to be more rhythmic, and I love doing that too. But a lot of times when it comes to a synthesizer sound, I try to think more in terms of a monochromatic instrument that is allowed to have a single melodic line.
Right.
And also, and this was something that I learned as a kid when I was learning how to play, my first improvised instrument was actually vibraphone. Yeah, no shit.
Yeah, baby.
And I had a Music -1 book and a Horace Silver recording. And my drum teacher was the one who first taught me how to improvise. And he goes, you want to be able to sing your lines.
Yes.
Whenever possible. Your solos will be memorable and connect.
Yeah.
If you can sing them. And I've tried to carry that with me my entire life.
Yes.
So
yes.
So if even a slight little shred of that comes out in a recorded solo or in a performance, I feel like, yeah, it's a good day. All right.
So did you do that's that where that comes from.
Like how Tony Williams got the gig with Miles. He sang back one of Miles' solos to him, and I was like, okay, you got the gig. Anybody?
Who did that?
Tony Williams.
Did you do that on Aladdin Sane? Did you sing your solo? No, just kidding.
Parts of it, yes. Some of those, there were a couple of riffs that I definitely was. I mean, I used Garson's that weird ding 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 as a jump off point.
Yeah.
It started there. I mean, obviously I couldn't sing all the crazy shit, but there were moments where it was like, all right, that's a whole approach that I started learning when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I've had varying degrees of success with it. You know, some days it's just not working at all.
Well, I know in the live version that we played at Rosfest, you went into some Keith Emerson thing there.
Yes.
Well, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I was thinking to myself, what the fuck is he doing?
It was inspired by, I'll tell you, it was inspired by the last movement of the Three Fates on the first album.
Okay.
I was like, you know what, for a live performance, I think that would be a nice tip of the hat to try to weave that theme in.
Nice.
That's what you were picking up on, probably, John.
And Mark just went with it, you know, and I was like, okay, this is good. Yeah. And then your little intermission
Jazzer hive mind
from the Holy Grail, your little thing at the end of the when we were walking off stage. Did
I do that?
Yeah, I got it on the. And at the end, I came
forgot
up
about that.
I put my arm around him, and you hit the last chord, and for some reason at the same time we both went like this. It wasn't planned. It just sort of happened. And I heard you
Totally
you're
forgotten
walking
about
away.
that
You can hear you chuckling, going, as you're walking away.
Give them a show, baby.
Yeah.
That's what it's
And
all
here we
about.
are.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, what you got anything to add here?
No, just, you guys pretty much said everything and plus, and got the release date happening, the pre-order happening. You got to go buy this thing, show your support for the band.
And what are
And,
those dates again? What are
and
those dates again, Ron?
It's April 28th, the pre-order, and
Right.
May 26th is the actual date that comes out.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sorry, I just wanted to put another plug out for us. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Also, I wanted to write it down so I could put it on Facebook.
There you
Yeah,
go.
me too.
Everybody put it on Facebook. Whatever
I'll
else
put it up
you
on
can.
social media.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll also put it down in the comments below so people know where to the dates and where to go and get it from.
Great.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. It's a great record.
Oh,
We're-
thank you guys. Yeah, I appreciate the music you all done for over the years, and
Thank you.
I mean, out of all you guys, I only know Matt from in person, but it's like I feel like you guys I've known you for a long time, so that kind of makes it easier for me to talk to you guys.
Right on.
Well,
Cool,
it's great to finally meet you because I mean I know I've known of you for quite a while, and I see your picture on Facebook, and I didn't really know you at all, so. And so I was a bit nervous about doing this interview because I didn't know what to expect. I said, Matt, what should I expect? What should I expect? Tell me. But
The
it ended
great
up
guy that
being-
loves music, and we're so thankful that you really dig Ardis.
Yeah.
It was we started writing this album like right before the pandemic, and John and I had to basically write this album, the rest of the album, from either side of the coast, and send files back and forth to each other. And we didn't think that we'd ever be finished with it, but
no.
But we did, and I think I can speak for John. I think this is one of the best things that it's one of the things I'm most proud of as far as our output. I've listened to the master, and I forgot that I was a part of the record. That's when I'm just listening to it as music, and I forget that, oh shit, I co-wrote that song.
Right.
That's a great feeling. That's a very that probably doesn't happen to too many people too often.
It's rare. So thank you for digging it, and thanks for letting everybody know that is happening.
Yeah, appreciate it.
And
Let's
you guys
just get
for
some
taking the
festivals and tours together, huh?
Yeah, look at that. Get out
There
there,
you
play some
go.
shows, man.
Yeah, play as many places as you can.
Absolutely.
Well, that's why we have Steve helping us with that end of things, and we're kind of trying to figure the whole like ball of wax out at this point, how we're gonna manage it with everyone being all over the place.
But when we do, you will be one of the first people who knows, so that you can tell everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
So
And,
I do. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
I just wanted to put a plug in for our newest member, who the rest of these guys haven't even met yet, but it's someone I met when I was in graduate school. Her name's Michelle Cosgrove, and she's probably one of the best flute players in the Philadelphia metropolitan area. And she also plays keyboards and sings. So she's replacing Kent Francis in the live lineup. And so we're adding yet another keyboard player who also plays flute. So we're going to be able to push our sound is going to be pushed a little more into a symphonic sound than previously, because before we would traditionally have 2 keyboard players, me being one of them, and then 2 guitar players. Now we're working with 3 keyboard players and a guitar player. So it's gonna give the sound a little bit of a different direction. I'm really curious to see how it's gonna all play out.
Well, the fact that you're one of your other keyboard players is such a guitar fanatic, even though he doesn't play guitar, might actually help in this regard.
Yeah, you got a drummer that plays both keyboards and guitars too. So.
Yes.
Yeah, because I'll be going for finding some of those textures to still get that kind of spirit in there. So that's gonna be a fun puzzle to put together.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I
Cool,
want to
guy.
thank you guys. I want to
Thank
thank
you,
you
Ron.
guys for
Thanks, Ron.
Yep.
I appreciate it, and I'll put all the links down below and tell people look out on your social medias, both Ten Jinn and your separate, personal one, so you can, have updates.
Great.
Look us up,
Thanks
ask
so
us
much,
questions. We'll answer you.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks again, guys.
Thanks
I
again.
appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks,
Have a good one,
man.
Ron.
Thank you.
See you,
Are
gents.
we
Take
are we
care.
logging off now? Is that what we're doing?
Yes.
Bye-bye.
I think so.
All right.
All right.
Well, have a good weekend, and I guess we'll be talking to you guys again on the 6th on our next meeting.
Okay.
Yep.
And now we have some new stuff to talk
Okay.
about, right?
Yep. All right, guys. Everybody
Yep.
be well.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
All
Bye-bye.
right.
Take these.
Bye.